something interesting is sure to happen. Well, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Mr. Rabbit? Then why did you ask the question?
Goodness, this is quite extraordinary.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
But today is turning into the most curious adventure I have ever had.
Welcome, fellow travellers, learners and explorers. I'm Georgia Ellis, and thank you for tuning in to the Alice in Wonderland podcast. Today, I'm joined by Greg Collier. So Greg is an experienced people leader. I know this because I've been one of the people he's led in the past. He's a business manager, facilitator, coach. He's also an MC, a narrator, and a consultant. And a lot of his work, he has lots of little diverse areas that he works in, and his work is centered around organizational development, innovation, human-centered design, product development, culture, change management, strategy, generational diversity, virtual teams, and agile delivery. So there's a lot in there, and I'm not sure how much we're going to get to today. So let's get curious and welcome Greg.
Georgia, it's interesting hearing all of that because, wow, I sound really clever, don't I? But it's been quite a journey to put some of those little sentences into my CV and into my little backpack. And really looking forward to a bit of a tour around Wonderland with you as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So let's get into it. One of the questions I ask my guests, I've changed it up a little bit recently, actually. So there's a question I like to ask to kick things off. And I want you to imagine... Actually, I'm going to ask you the question I used to ask people. I think it's really relevant for you. I want you to imagine that I'm a 7-year-old Alice, wandering my way, playing and skipping my way through Wonderland, and I bump into you, Greg. And I look at you and I say, Mr. Collier, what do you do in Wonderland? What is it that you do? How would you describe what you do to a 7-year-old girl?
I'm quite envious of you as a 7-year-old girl because the curiosity that you have as you explore that world is something that I try to embrace. And I'm just looking around kind of the same way that you're looking around as well and exploring things. And I'm a curious kind of cat. I just like to look around and see what I can discover and see what I can notice. And when I think I know what I'm looking at, I like to look at it from a bit of a different angle to see, am I really seeing that, or am I seeing something that I've seen before and trying to recognise it from a past experience? And that can be quite challenging after my 53 years on the planet. And yeah, I've seen a few things, and I've travelled a lot, and a lot of things seem familiar, but you know, the familiar is a bit tricky. Now, if I had that response to a 7-year-old Alice in Wonderland, I'd probably confuse you. But that would be around just travelling and looking at things and exploring things and picking things up and seeing how they work. And I'm curious. I love seeing what things do and how they work and how they interact with things. So I guess I'm an explorer.
Beautiful. Awesome. So being an explorer, and you've done all this exploring at the moment. By the way, I'm not a 7-year-old Alice anymore. I'm Georgia. What excites you the most about the world we're living in today?
Seeing people navigate through it and seeing how they take their past and lived experience and apply it to the world that is so different to what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 days ago, 1 day ago, 10 minutes ago. And seeing how that shapes kind of the world that they're experiencing and the impact that they choose to have on the world, or perhaps the impact that the world then has on them and how they cope with that impact and how the world copes with the impact that they have as well.
So it's just the times that we're in at the moment, it excites you just seeing people sort of, are you finding people are levelling up?
Levelling up. Oh, I love that term. I think complexity is emerging and the world is more complex. And I think that is happening because we're up for that. We're creating this complexity because as living beings, we're up for bigger problems and bigger challenges, more so than than the previous versions of ourselves. And so I think we're being confronted with more information and more technology and more problems than perhaps ever before. And I think that's on purpose. I think we've created that so that we've got some really big, hairy problems to solve.
I love what you say there about complexity, because I'm actually reading some of Keegan's work. So Keegan's out of Harvard. He's done, I see you nodding, he's done quite a bit of work around the adult development. And he talks about the different types of minds that we have, and the more complex we are in our thinking, the more complexity in our mind is, the better we're going to be at solving problems, solving these wicked problems that the world seems to be creating through that complexity at the same time. So I love that you've said that. And he talks about, I don't know if you've heard the terms, he talks about, and I think there's a bit of Jane Lovinger's work in here as well, where they talk about the conformist mind. So that's, living from the way I've always lived, basically, and just conforming to what I've been giving and thinking the world can't really change, into, so there's the conformist mind, then there's the self-authoring mind, which is someone who starts to get a little bit more creative and they start to think for themselves. And he calls the Holy Grail the transforming mind, which means we become a chameleon. We can transform, we can become curious, and we can move around the world quite differently. We have a higher level of perspective as well. We can see things differently. And before we started recording, we were actually having some really good conversations about some of the things that are piquing your interest at the moment. And I think some of that was around the points of view we had ourselves. And you used a term, and I'm going to see if I'm not going to do this justice. Was it solipsistic? Is that it?
Yeah, so being solipsistic.
Solipsistic.
Yeah, or the concept of solipsism.
Yep.
Which is this idea that I am me, and that's the only thing that I really know exists.
Yep.
And that the world perhaps exists outside of me, but at least I know it exists within me. It kind of gets into the matrix a little bit, doesn't it? But
just on that, that's another level that Keegan talks about, and that's the level before the conforming mind. I can't remember what he calls it, but it's basically, it's just I'm only about my own needs, and I only know what I know, sort of thing. That's very similar to that. So can you unpack that a little bit further for our listeners?
Yeah. So if you think of a child as they're brought into the world, a baby human, there's a while there that I think only they know that they exist, and their whole life is around, how do I survive as a little human being without any awareness really that other people exist around me. I'm the center of my whole universe. And then across stages of human development, I think they then step into this awareness that actually someone else exists and other people exist as well. And so I'm part of a wider system. And so navigating through that wider system is complex. And I'm blessed with having a couple of grandkids, and I watch my 11-month-old grandson as he navigates his world, and he can actually see something kind of, maybe it's 4 meters away from him and it's at a different height. And through his behavior, he can use the people around him as warm scaffolds and go from person to person to person. And being part of that system, you think, oh, he just wants a cuddle from me, but no, he's actually using me as a stepping stone to get from me to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, so that he can get the thing that he's noticed on his bench or in the distance. And so that awareness that other people exist is so complex, because once you then develop into, say, childhood and then into adulthood, then you start to get involved with other humans and you start to develop human relationships. And in doing that, I think you then get propelled or influenced to be bigger than you are and to have an influence on that environment around you. And that whole, you're talking about before, some of those constructs, whether it's Keegan or that idea about self-actualization, this ability to then think, through navigating my relationships with other people, I actually can become a better version of myself. I can grow as a human by interacting with other humans. And that whole navigation process is just so fascinating. And some people, based on their learned, or maybe it's an inherited experience, they have some real courage around being able to interact with other people, whereas other people have some real fear about being able to interact with other people as well. And I think then, because of the way we work in this system, is if you're fear-driven and you're fearful of the environment and the world around you, I think that starts to limit your personal growth and your ability to actualize. Whereas if you're in a system that is really supportive of you as a human, so you feel encouraged, given courage by the system, then that then opens you up to explore the world around you, and to do so in a way that is courageous and curious, and you just start to then become a bigger and better human than you ever thought even possible. And I think collectively, given the collective intelligence that we're lucky to have in the environments that we live in, and I'm not saying that that happens around the world, I think that this is why this complexity is starting to happen, because collectively we're up for some of this stuff. We're up for some of the big challenges that are emerging.
I love the term you use there around the system supporting us. And I immediately started thinking about the different types of systems that we interact with in our lives. So there's the family system, there's the workplace system, there's the social system. And you could move from system to system, and some of those wouldn't be supportive and some of them would. So if you look at the work that you do in organizational development, I mean, people would attend something that you're facilitating and they'll go back into the system that potentially may not be encouraging and supporting them. Do you find that happens, or that is something that happens in some organizations?
And what I try to do, definitely, and so what I try to do in those organizations, because even within organizations you have, say, departments or teams that are microsystems within a macro system. And then in terms of the other countries that I work in as well, you might have an Australian-based organisation that then operates in another country, and so the system that operates in that country compared to the home base is a little bit different as well. And so one of the things that I try to get the mirror out to hold people up for is this. I was on a panel yesterday, and someone asked the question, or they made the reflection that the use of pronouns and the use of labels around hi guys, they find it really offensive, and that the system should do something about that. And my view to the person was, if someone found something that you said offensive, would you like to know about that straight away, face to face, or would you like them to tell a group like this that they found it offensive but not to let you know? She goes, I'd love them to let me know. I said, well, why don't you go and let that person know? So you might learn about personal pronouns on a workshop, and or different language, and then you can sit back as an observer and a commentator or a narrator of the system and say, this is happening, this is happening. The courageous thing to do is to go out there and actually start to be the change and to influence the change you want in the system. So if you're up for the challenge, to then go out and call people on some of the things that you find offensive, but being able to, simple model like situation, behaviour, impact, talk about the impact that it's having on you, label the behaviour, make sure they understand what it is that you're experiencing or that you're seeing, call out the impact that it's having on you, and then ask for something a little bit different. And those little one-on-one discussions can then start to really ramp up and change the system. And I think everyone's got that opportunity.
I agree. And I also am sitting here thinking from a different perspective, thinking, well, that person or those people who get upset by those pronouns, is it really something worth getting upset about? Like if I run workshops like you run workshops, and I use the term guys. Hey guys, that's just how I am, right? It's just, but for someone to take offense from that, from my intention, is it the person who's taking offense's fault, or is it my fault? Should I have to change everything so that I can appease everybody in a workshop? So does the person who's hearing it need to have higher levels of self-awareness, or does the person who's delivering it need to have higher levels of situational awareness? Where does it start? Where does it end? It's really complex, right?
Yeah. And if it's having an impact on the person that's hearing it, then you can't guess, you know, that what you're saying is having an impact, a negative impact on that person. It's up for them to be able to call it out, to be able to let you know. And once you know that it's causing offence to that person, you've then got a choice. You can then say, well, too bad, I'm going to stick with what I know. Or, wow, I didn't actually understand that word was having that impact on you or perhaps others. And so now that I know, I've then got a choice to alter my behaviour or to keep going based on what I now know anyway.
Yeah. So it comes down to communication, having the courage and being brave of letting people know when things are offending you for whatever reason. And then if you're at the other end getting that feedback, to make that choice, whether you take that on board and change your behaviour or whether you don't, you know.
Yeah.
It's your choice, isn't it?
It's your choice. And it's interesting. I often tell people about a conversation I had with my youngest daughter, who's now 21. But there was a time where we just weren't seeing as much of each other as we were, and that started to worry me. I was on the road a little bit, and I said to her, she was then 16. How about we go and have a regular catch up? You know, it's nearly like a performance review. How am I going as a dad? How are you going as a daughter? And we can give each other feedback. And it was kind of a bit weird, but we did it. You know, it was better than just sitting in front of the TV or across from dinner, and it was quite purposeful and really enjoyable. But at one stage, I said to her, you know, how am I going as a dad? You know, and she goes, oh, not too bad. And the not too bad wasn't quite as, you know, delicious as you get on a Father's Day card, you know, all those nice things that you hear. And I thought, oh, gee, what do you mean not too bad? What's up? And she goes, oh, I don't want to talk about it. Oh, well, that's a bit interesting. And yeah, I'm curious, so I'm really interested to know, well, just tell me, like, being your dad's important to me. Tell me what's going on. And she goes, just drop it, Dad. Leave it alone. Don't worry about it. And the big part of me wanted to keep going, but the learned part of me said, righto, time to shut up and just have a sip of my coffee, which I did. And it felt like 10 minutes, but it was probably 30 seconds. And then she said, fine, I'll tell you. And she then shared that it seems to me every time I bump into you, you've got a job for me to do. Like you've been storing up a big list of things to, you know, for me to do. And just for context, she has a wardrobe in her room. She has a wardrobe, but she prefers the wardrobe, and that impacts on the environment around her. And so, you know, that's one of the jobs, you know, tidy your room, or can you do the dishes, or can you help vacuum the floor, or can you unpack the dishwasher, or whatever that might be. And so I just listened, and she said, in actual fact, I actually walk home into the back door hoping that you're not going to be there. And if I actually know that you're in the house and I can hear you, I actually walk straight down the passage to my room hoping that you don't know that I'm home and hoping that I don't bump into you because you're going to give me a job to do. That really hurt to hear. But based on that information, similar to the pronouns, I've got a choice. I can either defend my position to be able to say, well, hang on, fair enough. You live in this house, and you know you've got to contribute as an adult to the you know, environment around you, or I can just kind of let that sit, because it didn't sit too easy, and let that sit around. Wow, if that's what that's like for her, and of course, as a dad, I wanted to fix that there and then, but I just chose just to let it sit there, and to say, well, if that's her experience, I can learn from that experience and just see what that feels like. And I was going to go into some feedback from her about how she's going as a daughter, but I decided not to in that moment. And it's interesting, yeah, the next time we bump into each other might have been the day after or the next day, and she's walked into the kitchen and there I am, and was kind of, I had about 8 jobs that I was ready to give her, and I just chose not to. But over a period of time, she actually then started to contribute more of the house, you know, doing little jobs, you know, things, volunteering, I guess. And I actually started to be a little less hyper vigilant on the things that she wasn't doing. And we started to express some appreciation for each other, and it really changed that relationship.
Yeah, beautiful.
So I think to that example, she could have chose not to tell me that was impacting on her. I could have chosen to defend my position, but I think we'd both sat there in unconscious awareness that the dynamic of our relationship was even more important.
Mm.
And rather than try and fix it, let's just call it out and step into a position of knowing it. And that relationship is now stronger than it's ever been. And at one level, I was extremely delighted that I have managed to grow a small adult to the point where she can actually call that out with someone in her system courageously, because I think it takes courage to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that you are able to, even though on the inside you're probably going, I want to defend this, but then you don't. You stop, you pause, and you sit back and you just take it on, and you wear it. You wear what she's given you, and it comes back to the point around perspective, because it's now given you a perspective you didn't see. You couldn't see how she was viewing you as her father, and that's a real gift to have that new perspective.
And I was aware that we weren't seeing each other as much as we had been, and I'd put it down to the fact that I was travelling and she was busy at school or
she
whatever.
was hiding from you.
She was hiding, and I had no idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just such a really great story, because if we think about how we are in, let's say, the workplace or at our other relationships that we've got, we will find that when things aren't going right for us, without having the courage to bring it up with another person, we will hide from people. We'll use avoidance instead of actually calling that out and having those conversations with people. And I think that story is a really good example of how being brave and courageous to call out those things, not necessarily the pronouns, but how people are affecting you in your day-to-day running of your life, so to speak, which is really about that level of complexity, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's interesting you're talking about Keegan before as well, because the person that Keegan does a lot of work with, Lisa Leahy.
Leahy, yeah.
And they kind of talk about, they talk about the immunity to change and about how systems kind of stop you fixing what it is because you can't see what it is that you're trying to fix. But at one level, it's actually then calling out some of the things that happen that are really starting to irk you and to get on your nerves a little bit. And for some people, they just call it out straight away. As soon as something happens in their system, they just, even if it's a one-on-one relationship, oh, that was a bit ugly, I'm gonna call it out. Other people kind of put it off. I might put it off for a little while, a couple of weeks, whatever, hoping that it will fix itself and I won't need to say anything. Other people then put it off even further and don't actually say anything for a year or even 2 years, and by then the impact on the relationship or performance or whatever has really dropped away. And some people never do it. Mm. They'll wipe someone from their life because it's just too hard to actually bring that discussion to the fore, and especially when there's some ugly stuff going on that people don't want to talk about it. It's easier just to move on, to wipe someone.
Yeah, what am I pretending not to know?
Yeah, not to know. Yeah, and I'll just get on with my life without that person kind of in my life. And that can be complex in organisations when that person might be your boss, as an example, and or in a family when they might be a spouse or one of your kids. But when I say to people in workshops around some of these things, which person are you? Do you kind of call it out early, or do you kind of let it go? Most people fall into the middle ground between kind of a couple of weeks and a few months. They let it kind of go on for a bit. But when I flip that around and say, if that was you, when would you want that person to let you know that was happening? They all say straight away. Without exception, they want to know straight away. Even if it's hard to hear, tell me. I'd rather know. And so I don't get the flip. If it's me causing it, I want to know, but if it's someone else, I'm happy to put it off and hope for the best.
I was going to ask whether you realised why that is, why people do it, and have you got an answer? Have you found anything? Have you been curious?
Well, it's just kind of awkward, because we live in a kind of funny thing. I talk about, you might be talking to someone and you're talking at a function and you're a foot and a half away from each other, and just a little bit of saliva comes out of your mouth and lands on the person's shirt, or perhaps it's a a whole samosa, that comes out and bounces off their cheek. And we both see it, but no one says anything. And that whole thing fascinates me about why the hell wouldn't we say, hey, stop chucking your lunch at me.
Say it, don't spray it.
Yeah, exactly. But some people don't even say it. Like, same thing if you're talking to someone and you notice their mascara's run down their eye, or they've got a bit of parsley in their teeth or something. You're the kind of person that says you just might want to check your makeup, or you might want to just take that out of your teeth, or do you just kind of move on hoping that they notice next time they go to the bathroom? Because if
I point it out straight away for people.
Yeah, and because that's what I'd want people to let me know.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to save you some more embarrassment. If no one tells you, you might be talking to another 5 people that don't have the guts to say anything. I'm going to tell you got a bit of broccoli in your teeth, buddy.
Yeah. And if I'm talking to someone and they've got lipstick on their teeth, I say, you probably want to know you got lipstick on your teeth. Yeah. And I
love what you said there. And that's a really good way to frame it, because I'm not sure why there are certain times for me, like the bits and pieces, like on their faces, I can tell someone instantaneously. I'm okay with that. But there is this point where if someone's irking me or annoying me, I will wait that a while. I've got to, I don't know, get myself ready to tell them most of the time. But I love what you just said there, and this could be a framework that people could use, is you probably want to know that.
Yeah.
Most people do want to know. You probably want to know that what you just said then actually impacted me this way. Or you probably want to know
pain, or
it caused me pain, or whatever it might be. You probably want to know that you've got a booger hanging from your nose, right? Yep. You probably want to know these things. I'm not saying you want to know. I'm just guessing that you're probably somebody who is really takes care of A, their appearance, or B, how they're affecting other people. So I think that might even be a little tool people could use, is you probably want to know. Yeah,
you probably want to know. I would know. It's funny when you make some people aware, depending on what the situation is. Some people can actually go into fight, flight and freeze when you make them aware. And so some people can default to defending their position. Sorry, I already knew that. I knew I had that hanging out of my nose in that Mustang. And so
saving it for later.
Yeah, or they, some people point out to me obvious things. Geez, you're going grey. Really? I hadn't noticed. Like, I get a little bit sarcastic. But it's but for some reason that triggers that for people, fight, flight and freeze. But it gets a little bit tricky, I guess, in systems as well, especially when there's a language that starts to happen, or a level of colloquialism, or even some things in some systems are okay and some things aren't. For 6 years, I was the president of the local football club. And in that environment, we did a couple of things as a club that were kind of locked into our normal way of doing things. Thursday nights, we had about 220 or so people for dinner. And part of our kind of rhythm was that we had someone tell a joke. And sometimes those jokes were just a little bit NQR, using some language that you would say, well, that's footy club, so it's okay. But it really wasn't. And then when we started to, we were one of the leaders around getting women's football up and going in the local competition, and we're now into our 4th year. When someone had said to me, you might just want to change the language of the jokes, we started to have families come, not just footballers come for Thursday night dinners. You just might want to change that down. And when I started to bring that to other people's awareness, just watch the joke, make sure, can you vet the joke before you tell it? People then started to take a bit of offence to that as well, and kind of dismiss it. Nowadays, we don't even tell the joke. The local football club is built on Indigenous land. That's really important. It's one of the most significant Indigenous sites in Australia. And there's some pushback around the Indigenous rights and the Indigenous importance for Indigenous people around that land. And when you put that into the football club environment, into that kind of system, there was some real, I'm going to use the word disdain, or some dismissiveness about the importance of that. And calling that out when people were using inappropriate language and responding in ways that just weren't okay, really then started to test me as a leader, because I was aware that whatever I just, in a group of people, didn't call out, I was signaling I was okay with. And that stuff becomes a real test of who you are, because it not only reflects and becomes a part of the culture that's happening, people see it as a part of what I believe in as well. And I had to call out a couple of things. Hey, that's not okay. And when you call it out, you get dismissed around that's not important. And then you have to have a reinforcement just to let you know that that language and that term or that kind of response is not welcome here anymore.
Yeah. So it's a real culture change that you had to do with the footy club.
Significantly, yeah.
And one of the things that you mentioned there is around the reinforcing of it. So you say it once and people take it with a grain of salt, a bit of disdain, they push back on it, they actually start judging you, not the message. But then over time, if you're consistent with that, they realize that it's serious, and then do they start to change?
They do, or interestingly, some people fall away.
Yeah, which is good.
Yeah, well, they don't kind of fit, which at one level it's kind of good, but at one level it's kind of sad, because you want all people to belong and to fit in. If I put this into a corporate environment as an example, the equivalent might be around business planning or strategy. And I've been to many, many meetings when the person with the strongest voice or the most valued opinion in the room was someone from the finance department who held the businesses that I've run accountable for delivering the numbers. And if say the month's performance had been really strong, or the year was really strong, was fantastic, and I used to say, hey, it's my fault, it's my leadership, that's why all the great performance is happening. But if it was a little bit poor and we were a little bit behind schedule, then the finance person would kind of put a bit of heat in there and saying, well, you need to be able to deliver this and you need to be able to deliver that. And of course, it wasn't my fault when things weren't performing. But the thing that was happening in the system is that everyone believed that the forecasting was exactly right across the whole year, and that the most learned person in the room was someone from finance who wasn't actually responsible for delivering the goals that or the business performance. They were just responsible for keeping score. And no one in that system thought to say, perhaps the numbers are wrong. Perhaps we should be challenging the person from finance, because if we're so far off hitting the numbers that we'd agreed on, perhaps the person who set the numbers in the first place is the person who got it wrong, rather than all of us trying to do it. The converse is, if we're so far ahead of system, and everyone in the room is above target, then perhaps the numbers were wrong as well. That perhaps we were limiting our kind of view about what was actually possible. And so, a lot of systems, I put a fair bit of heat on who's got the loudest voice in the room, what's okay. When someone speaks, everyone listens without challenging that. And it gets really even more complex when the person doing that is the CEO or the leader of that department, that they're so locked into their own opinion and their own perspective, and everyone in the room, outside of the room, when they walk away saying, I didn't agree with that at all.
Yeah, but they don't say it in the room. They
don't say it in the room. They don't call it out because it's hard.
It is hard, especially when it depends on the individual who's the leader, and what the culture is in an organization, that if you call things out, do you get punished for it? Is there some form of punishment? Do you forego your bonus? Do you lose your job? Depending on the organization, there's a real, risk of calling things out.
Yeah. And this is where solipsism starts to play its ugly head, because if the leader is solipsistic in their views, so that they believe that they're the smartest person in the room, that the team exists just for them to deliver their own performance, that they are the center of the whole universe around how this works, it's really hard to get a counter view to that. And that leader, when charged up and challenged, would find ways to distance that person who is a contrary voice from the system.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of examples in politics that you'll see around the planet at the moment, where if you're not towing the company line, then you're out. Whereas other leaders have the courage to say, actually, I'm the kind of person employs people in my team that are smarter than me. I'm a facilitator in my role. And what I want is diversity of thought. I want diversity of opinion. I want to put my views on the table, but I want them challenged so that collectively we come up with a much better view about what's possible and maybe better quality ideas and input than we would have if everyone in my team were just being compliant because I was the hierarchical leader in that system.
So you find leaders like you're talking about, the ones that they're the center of the universe, they would halt innovation because all they're seeing the world is through their own point of view. And if it's not their idea, it's not right. So they would probably halt where they can go as an organization and potentially drive their ship off the edge of the world if we had a flat world. At some point, not immediately, but at some point, I think that could potentially happen as well. Because you're not open to change, anything new, hearing from a different voice. You're blocking opportunity.
Definitely, and I say that a lot. Ironically, the people that don't want any outside kind of influence, they don't usually invite consultants like you and I into their business. We don't actually know who they exist. And as a consultant, one of the best gifts I had from a former leader that I worked for really early on into her career. She came outside of our organisation, outside of kind of my role. And her first advice to me was that I really dislike people like you, Greg. Well, why is that? And she goes, because I can be experiencing something that's really complex and I've been trying to solve it in my business for a year, maybe 2 years, maybe I've been trying to solve it in my career for 10 years. And you come in as a consultant and within 10 minutes, you think you know how to fix it. She goes, I think it's a very arrogant view. And I carry that with me all of the time. So when someone's explaining to me something really complex, I give them my perspective, but I don't present it as what they should do and what they could do. I just kind of load it up as just, well, from where I sit, this is kind of what I see. Does that help? And then that tends to get into conversation. And then through partnership, I'm normally invited back to then have that kind of level of discussion and creative kind of discovery conversation as a facilitator with everyone else in the room. And what actually usually happens in that role is that all of those views and that curiosity was existing in that team in the first place, but they didn't have someone who could facilitate that discussion and make sure everyone could get heard. And kind of that's where I get to add most of my value, not by what I know, but my ability to actually get people to talk and to present their opinions and perspectives in a way that everyone hears it and can bounce and build off that.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love that. I know when I frame workshops that I run, it's a similar thing. Even though I'm at the front of the room, I tell people I don't know everything. The room is full of genius. And I love giving people permission that if they have something to add, all ears, chuck it in. We're all here. We actually learn more if everyone puts their two cents or whatever it is, probably more than that, if they put their knowledge on the table as well for all of us to gather from. And I think that's a really beautiful way of bringing together the shared knowledge that we have, because there's only so much time we have as human beings and so much knowledge we can gather, and everyone's going to have a different perspective and different pieces of value that they can bring to, whether it's in a learning experience, a strategy session, or a problem solving session, right? So I think that's really wonderful. And I love that advice that you got, although that word saying how arrogant of you coming in thinking you can solve something I've been working on for so long. I've got the answers. So again, it's about stepping back and offering information, offering points of view that potentially they can't see. There's a really beautiful story that's in the beginning of a book called U Squared, and it's about a fly. And what's happening is the narrator, the author of the book, he's sitting in a hotel and he's watching this fly persistently try to get through the glass window, trying to get through it, it's just trying harder and harder. And we've all seen it, haven't we? We've all seen these flies trying to get through windows.
Well, that's that great resilience, don't they?
They just keep going, they keep going. And the author, he's writing this story and he says, but he's going to keep trying until he dies, basically, the fly, because we see all these dead flies on the windowsill. The fly's not aware, but what the author can see, from a different point of view, from a different perspective, the author can see that there's a door 10 seconds flying time away that is open, that could let the fly get into the goal that it wants, which is to get outside. So when you think about that from a point of view of perspective, having a consultant, having a coach, having a mentor, having a facilitator, somebody that has a different perspective, while you're sitting there banging your head on the glass like the fly, you're going to end up not getting where you want, because you're doing the same thing coming from a conditioned mindset that is yours and yours alone, your own perspective. You think it's the right way, but if you've got somebody from a different perspective, they can point out those open doors. They can point out those opportunities that you can't see. And that only happens when you're open to it as well. So I think what you're saying here is absolutely, you can go in, you go in as a consultant and you're offering the narrator's point of view. Here you go. I see an open door. If you like, all you have to do is change direction, and you give them that opportunity.
I ran a workshop in New Zealand once, and a bird flew into the room. It was on a farm, and with the big open doors, and the air conditioner wasn't working, and the doors were open, and this bird flew in, and it then proceeded to get quite nervous and try to get out of the room, and was banging into windows, and similar to your fly. And then a very learned person in the room got up, said, just let's calm down for a second, closed all of the blinds, turned off the lights, and the bird flew straight out the open door. And just show me the pathway. And you know, often it's just let's just disrupt what's actually happening, call things to a halt. If a meeting's going poorly, stop. You know, let's turn the lights off and let's see what is the problem we're trying to solve here. Let's just kind of reset, stand up, do something a little bit different. And quite often that disruption is the biggest thing. You mentioned innovation there before as well. And one of the biggest threats to innovation is to keep trying to kind of look at a new problem to solve, but using the tools and the existing frameworks that we've been using in the business forever. And yeah, the biggest thing, or the biggest threat to innovation that I see is this homogeneity that starts to happen in teams, that everyone starts to think the same, that everyone's difference of opinion then starts to have the same flavour and kind of gets diluted because we're all talking about the same thing in the same way. And leadership has a role on that as well. And it's often the little quiet voice in the corner, there's someone that we haven't heard from for a second that we can just throw to that person, and out of nowhere they just chuck something into the room, just a comment, a discussion. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but I reckon we should do this, or we haven't even thought about this. That little circuit breaker can lead that whole team onto a whole new pathway that they had not even considered. And it's just so important.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said there too about it's almost like are you aware of the flow cycle? It's sort of come out of the Flow Genome Project. So they have the struggle. So the struggle is we're all here, we're all trying to brainstorm something, we're trying to come up with something and it's just not working. And then the next phase is what they call the release phase, which is let's let go of the struggle. Let's just go and do something different. And then when you release, you're getting out of your own way basically, and then you drop into flow or the zone. And then afterwards you obviously need to recover. So that's the cycle, and that's the cycle of innovation in a way as well. We have the struggle, we have the brainstorming, but then if you could just stop, release it, surrender, get out, do something different, it allows, from a science perspective within the brain, it allows the brain to actually get all the information you've been talking and come up with disparate ideas create ideas from disparate information that you've been talking about. And that's like the little person in the corner of the room who's been watching you all struggle is sitting there just putting it all together and goes, well, what about this? We need to be able to have that opportunity to release so that we can get into that optimal performance as a team, but also as individuals as well.
And it's fascinating around that as well. Like, so you'll see people who spend their whole life at a desk. I've run workshops recently where people sit on the same floor in the same building and they have never met each other. And you know, the first chance I've ever had to actually talk to people is to come on this workshop. And one of the things that can happen in that is if I'm so locked into problem solving and I'm whacking away at my computer and I'm trying to think through things and my brain's kind of feel a bit stuck, one of the best things you can do is to get up and just go and have a coffee with someone, or just go and say to them, can I grab you for 5 seconds and kind of replay what it is that you're trying to do, and just get their uninformed perspective and get them to ask you a question of, can you play back to me what you just heard? And it'll just release some kind of insight that you hadn't even thought of before. I love when that happens and you walk into someone's office and you'll say, oh, can I just have a chat to you? I want to do this and I want to do that, and I'm trying to do this and I'm doing this and this isn't happening, so I'd really like to do this. And, oh, yeah, I know exactly what I need to do. Hey, thanks, that's been really helpful. And the person hasn't even said anything apart from giving me the offer.
And yeah, happens quite a lot, doesn't it? It's just a matter of getting it, verbalizing it, because the verbalize gives it a little bit more structure and you can start to put things together from a neurological point of view. So. Yeah. Amazing stuff. Hey, there was something we spoke about off air before we started that I really want to delve down, and this, because this excites me. This really excites me. And this was around your approach to anti-goal setting. Because you become anti-goal setting, and I love this. So can you share what you mean by that? So why this approach to not setting goals or changing the way we set goals?
Yeah, well, so I was kind of always been I'm a bit of an intention setter, not really a goal setter. I had a great question on a panel I was talking on yesterday about recruitment, and about whether to get the gender mix right in leadership pathways, we need to have a quota. And I'm kind of, the other 3 people on the panel were, yeah, we probably need to have a quota, and otherwise it's not going to happen. And I'm like, I'm going to disagree. I don't reckon we need a quota. I've worked in quota systems before, and I don't think they kind of work, because the quota predetermines that's a goal, and most quotas don't actually have a date on them anyway, so it's a false goal. Whereas I think, you can put a number on it, you can measure it, and what gets measured kind of gets done anyway. So, putting a number on it is important. But I've been reading some stuff that is confusing me a bit. So I'm glad I'm confused as I'm walking around. I'm reminded of the energy of your 7-year-old self that we were talking about earlier, in that this view that, similar to a finance department, that'll set the financial performance expectations for a business 12 months out, or even 3 years out, around, these are the markets we want to play in, and this is the profitability we want to deliver, and this is the sales volumes that we want to achieve. And then the whole system then orientates towards achieving exactly that. All of the KPIs or the KRAs for the system, the job description documents, the personnel are all aligned to achieving that goal that was set on today for the next 12 months. And, well, what if something emerges from the system, or an opportunity emerges from the system tomorrow that we weren't aware of today? That you've kind of locked into this path and this system, and you've locked it in concrete around achieving your goals. One part of me says that you won't even see the opportunity because it's not on your to-do list. This is often the difference between the energy in a startup compared to the energy in an established business. The established business is so locked into a current way of thinking that they can't turn in a really quick way. And you'll see corporates saying, "Oh, we're doing agile." Well, good luck doing agile, because you're dancing really quickly on a massive big oil tanker that's not going to shift, no matter how quickly the people are shifting on the system. And so this goal setting then says, if you set a goal for doing this by this date, by doing and in this time and in this way, the system, I think, is more dynamic than your brain can even imagine. And if you lock yourself into just kind of doing that, you will set up internally, either consciously or unconsciously, all of these things that will orientate you towards achieving that goal. And you have this other thing called an ego that wants you to achieve exactly what it is that you set out to do. And I can just see, and I kind of haven't figured it out yet, I can just see how, hey, there's pluses for that. Around, I want to have, X amount of dollars in my savings account by this date. or I want to visit these amount of countries, or I want to win this amount of work. But hey, there's pluses for kind of having that intention, but there's also limitations around being too set around what it is that that goal can actually start to envisage for you as well. Your future self knows. And if I went in a time machine and whispered to my own 7-year-old self about what would you like to achieve by the time you're 53, future Greg, I would never have been able to imagine what it is that I'm currently doing now.
No.
So yeah,
I love that whole premise of anti-goals, but I'm not actually anti-goal. So I'm of the belief that we need to have something to aim for and something to aspire towards, but I think there's a balancing act or a bit of a tango we play with the goal and what's happening around us. So still being aware of what's happening in the world around us and what's changing, but also understanding that when we say as an individual we set our goals based on our current knowing and our current belief systems and what we believe we're capable of doing now. But as we start to progress and take the first step, we start to grow. Sometimes some of the layers and the old beliefs that don't serve us fall away. And then all of a sudden we can open ourselves up to something greater. Or you see something, you've been curious and you see something that's now a little bit different to what you wanted. An example, I had an amazing client I was coaching. And she started with me. We start off with what's your goals, what's your intention for having a coach? Because obviously you want something. And she wanted to become one of the best real estate agents, the highest, the best female real estate agents in Australia. That was her goal, massive goal. That was where she was heading for. But as we start going through the coaching process and start understanding more about her and what she really wants and start taking away the layers of beliefs and ego that doesn't serve her, she comes to me halfway through the coaching and says, look, I haven't really told you this and I hadn't actually thought of it for myself, but that goal I set, I don't really want. What I do want is, and she gets out her phone and she shows me, and she goes, I'm an artist. And she shows me this beautiful artwork she's been doing. She goes, I want to monetize and actually spend more time on my art. I actually don't care about being the best real estate agent. I've just been told all my life that I couldn't do this, but I actually want to do it. So yes, I like the idea of goals, but I like the idea of really paying attention from a corporate level or an individual level of what's going on around you and what's shifting and changing within the organism, whether it's the group or the individual. Because as culture changes, your goals will change as well. And as the world changes, technology changes, you've got to be ready to adapt. So it's not don't set goals, have something, but also keep your eye out for what's happening and be ready to say that's not going to serve us anymore. And I wonder if there's a deeper, and I don't have this answer, I wonder if there's a deeper sort of drawing, whether it be something that we value as an organization or some form of deeper purpose that aligns the goals, that allows you to shift fast. So if I'm a huge organization, got this great big ship we're in, but we've got a purpose to deliver some form of service or product, that if we have a really strong purpose, we can shift our goals to make sure they're still aligned to our purpose.
Well, and perhaps it's even coming back from that as well. So rather than setting, because a lot of businesses set financial goals, we want to come up with a new product or a new way of doing things so that we can achieve this this return on shareholders, or this level of income, whatever that might be, this level of savings. And perhaps we bring that back. And so we then start to say to people, how would you need to behave in order to achieve this better version of yourself? And so let's bring that back to the behavioural expectation of self for today. And let's just start behaving like that and see where we end up. If I'll give you an example about how that is. It must be about 30 weeks ago now, I made a decision finally that I was going to do something about my health and fitness. And so I started to go to the local F45. Now, the idea of gym just doesn't kind of turn me on too much. It doesn't really push my buttons. It sounds like hard work. I haven't been fit since I was about 15, I reckon. And even though I've been able to fake it. And so the idea of then setting a goal and saying, because when I started to set goals, I was like, I could probably drop 5 kilos. And I didn't want to set it too big because I didn't want to let myself down. You know, my ego's kind of involved. It set drop 5 kilos, or, you know, might be able to run 5K without a stop, or whatever that might be. But when I actually then started to get back to, and the personal trainer who looks after me, there's 2 of them at that gym, then said to me, well, kind of how do you want to be able to achieve that? What would you be up for? And I kind of said, look, I'm pretty busy, you know, maybe I'll go to the gym. I could probably do 2 sessions a week. What I didn't know back then when I started to set these goals is that current Greg loves going to the gym. And 5 kilos is about 10 kilos ago. And I now go to the gym 6 days a week. I have Sundays off. And some days I go twice a week. And if I don't go because I'm probably on an assignment, I really miss it. And one of the things I didn't kind of set was I didn't set a resting heart rate. You know, someone in finance might have helped me set a resting heart rate goal. I was sitting there the other day with my heart monitor on, and my resting heart rate was 53. And that a 53 resting heart rate would have been completely unimaginable for me 20 or 30 weeks ago. And so all I did was I set the intention to kind of head off and see what I could discover. And my performance, my energy, my happiness, the clarity of thought that I have, the energy that I bring to the relationships I have with other people, how I feel is beyond what I could have ever imagined. And so, and I didn't even, in hindsight, I couldn't even write the book about how did I do that. I just set off to see what I could set off. I opened up to the thought that perhaps let's just see what happens.
You experimented with going to the gym.
Yeah.
You got
curious. And I loved it, Georgia. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I know. Because the old Greg wouldn't have, right?
No, he would have hated it.
Yeah.
And would never have set an expectation to lose, I think it's now about 18 kilos, because that just seems impossible. But hey, now I'm thinking, oh, perhaps I could get it to 25. And people keep coming to me saying, oh, you're disappearing slowly. And I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. So I love
question it. For you. What was your initial intention for going to the gym? What made you go?
Well, it's interesting. My wife, Sharon, has been going for a fair bit longer than I have, and she's always been encouraging me to come along. And no, that didn't work. And it was actually when River, my 3rd grandchild, arrived. And I then started to imagine, how's it going to be trying to enjoy my grandkids if I'm at my level of fitness that I was then. And I want to be on the planet a bit longer, and I want to be able to enjoy those kids. And I could tell that the pattern I was in and what I was eating wasn't working for me. My brother-in-law also had a heart attack at 48, and that scared all of us. And I didn't do it immediately after that, but it was on my mind around things. And so I think I just come up with a reason. You know, there's a song that talks about if only my enemy was bigger than my apathy. And so, yeah, my goal then become an emotional one rather than a numeric one.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the biggest driver, is we've got to get emotionally involved with what it is. And most of the time we don't set ourselves goals we do things because we should do them, not because we've got this deep wanting and desire, this emotional desire for it. And yeah, and we could sit here and have a whole conversation around what's actually going on psychologically when we do that. But having at least something to move towards, because it changed you. You're now a different Greg. It's the journey you've been on. You're different, and you probably wouldn't ever want to go back to being the old Greg.
And it's funny how that then changes as well. I'm just looking at that lyric. So Mumford & Son, I Gave You All, is that song. So it's nice to kind of acknowledge them for
thank you.
that lyric that loops around in me. But it's interesting. I had a friend who said, oh, can you come and talk to this corporate? They've got a job you'd be fantastic at. And I went and talked to them, and I said, oh, geez, something to think about. I would really love this job. He said, well, just think about it for a couple of days and come back to me. And I ran this guy back and I said, oh, I would love this job. It's kind of a job that I've always kind of wanted, and I'd throw my life at it. I'd really pull it apart, and, we'd work really well together. And that's why I can't take it, because I've already done that. And I don't want a job anymore. I'm a different person. The Greg before I went into my own business 7 or so years ago would have jumped at that job. Yeah. My ego would have felt fantastic because I've been offered it. But you get into a different position. You want to achieve different things.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Especially when you get out there, and I think as you start to experience growth and see how you can become a different person, it becomes a little bit addictive, because you don't want the same old anymore. You actually want more. You want more variety, and you become really curious about life, and you see so much awe and fascination just in the simple thing of being, right? And sometimes going back to the old us isn't going to, it's not going to float our boats anymore. It's not going to fill us up like it once would have. Yeah. And that's part of the progression of growing as human beings.
Yeah. And just that whole journey thing that we do. I was in Europe on holidays back in January, and I got a bit crook, so I didn't go out. But then when I finally got back onto the world list, we would go out, and we were there with my brother-in-law and his wife, and my wife and I, and they would put in Google Maps, from where we were back to the hotel, and Mark would then say, "Oh, right, let's go this way, this," and I said, "No, let's go that way," like completely the opposite direction. And he reflected afterwards that that touring Paris was a lot more fun with me, because we saw things that they would never have seen. Because it's not about getting back to your hotel as quick as you can; it's about immersing yourself in the things around you and just having a bit of a look around. I think your 7-year-old self is very wise in that initial kind of context that you put into us today.
Mm. So I want to thank you for your time. We could sit and chat. I've got a list of things that we could chat about, but we're not going to. So thank you so much for jumping on. I've wanted to have you on here for a very long time, and also to acknowledge the work that you're doing, not only on yourself, but in organizations. And you're very influential when we work together in an organization in my own development. So that was a big thank you for that. So as we finish off, is there any sort of final words of, I'm going to use the term advice, but any sort of signposts or anything you'd like to leave our listeners with that potentially may help them as they move forward and as they, become a better human, whatever that means for them?
I think it falls back to that thing that I did with my daughter. If there's something in a relationship that is not quite where it needs to be, or there's something in your life that's just not kind of humming the way it needs to hum, and there's people contributing to that, just have the guts to be able to sit down and have a chat about it with someone. And if you want to be happier, if you want to be, want to stop hiding from someone you haven't seen for a while, set the intention to go and sit down with them and just have a chat, and not to fix it, but just to find out what's going on, just to and have the courage in there, not to try and answer it, just to sit in the confusion and see where it kind of works out. And not every conversation like that can fix everything, but geez, each one of them could. So I reckon to kind of do that. And hey, if it's a worthwhile conversation and it's something chunky and meaningful, then you're going to feel nervous about it. Perhaps reach out to a coach. Maybe they can help you do that. Give Georgia a call. But I just have it. Life's too short to kind of go on that journey and carry that stuff around your backpack.
Yeah, beautiful. So sit with the confusion. I love it. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Greg. And if people want to reach out to you, is there a way they can contact you? Social media, LinkedIn. So the best way to get in contact with you would be?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the go. And you and I are connected on LinkedIn. So if you go to your LinkedIn profile, look at your contacts, you'll be able to find Greg Collier on there.
Yeah, beautiful. Wonderful. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We went down some wonderful rabbit holes together. I really enjoyed that. So thank you so much and all the best. And thanks for listening, everyone.
Cheers.
Today is turning into the most curious adventure I've ever had.
Curiouser and curiouser.